The House will come to order. Members will be at their seats. The clerk has opened the roll, and you may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to the House chaplain and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Representative Probst.
Let us pray. Almighty God, again, we thank you for a beautiful day. As the date reflects, help us to march forth. The past cannot be changed. We do not want to forget the past, but we want to learn from the past. We want to take full advantage of the present in order to prepare for the future. So we take from your word these challenging words. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. We are to stand firm, letting nothing move us, always giving of ourselves fully to the work God has called us to do, because we know that our work is not in vain. This I pray in your name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Play ball.
Have all members had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Messages from the Senate, the clerk will read.
Announcing passage of Senate Bills 71, 72, 119, and 147. Senate Bill number 71 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning taxation relating to income and privilege tax credits, establishing an Eisenhower Foundation contribution credit. Senate Bill number 72 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning property taxation relating to county appraisers' qualifications and appraisal courses for registered mass appraiser designation, State Board of Tax Appeals appraisal course requirements. Senate Bill number 119 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning property taxation relating to State Board of Tax Appeals orders and notices, service by electronic means, time to request full and complete opinion, prohibiting valuation increases in certain appeals relating to the county appraiser eligibility list. Senate Bill number 147 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning sales taxation relating to exemptions, defining nonprofit integrated community care organizations and providing an exemption therefore.
Introduction of original motions and House resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Resolution number 6011 by Representatives Blex, Amends, and others, a resolution honoring the brave men and women of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard for serving the state of Kansas and the United States in times of emergency.
On House Resolution 6011, the Speaker recognizes Representative Blex for a motion to adopt the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor and a privilege for me to do this today. Body, I'm bringing to you for your consideration a resolution honoring our Kansas Army and Air National Guard men and women. They answer the call of duty at home and abroad. They also answered the call of duty recently. About 300 of Kansas National Guard went to protect our nation's capital at a moment's notice. And kind of imagine, put yourself in that situation, the thought of, in their mind, the decision to utilize possibly maybe deadly force against their fellow citizens. Thank God that it not happened. And in many ways, we are citizen soldiers that have our neighbors, our friends, they have a job. They have a more difficult time adjusting to the call of duty than our honorable soldiers that's actually on active duty. A long time ago, while on active duty, I was deployed for a combat tour in Vietnam for 14 months, but at least I had 30 days notice to get things prepared. I watched a young neighbor lady with 3 young children, ages 6 months to 4 years old, trying to arrange for a 24/7 child care arrangement for very young children. Her husband was out of town on a construction job and could not be available for 2 weeks. Only the mothers in this body can understand the emotional stress of leaving your young children in care of someone else and not being able to say for sure when she would be back. She came to our house and we agreed to watch and care for her farm animals and pets. It was a very small gesture, but a big relief for her. I watched her as she tearfully kissed and hugged her small children and told them bye, and told them, "Mommy will see you soon." It was a little bit comforting to the 4-year-old, but the younger children did not comprehend. She knew in her heart that she was not sure when the "see you soon" would be. She loaded her gear and was off to defend our nation's capital. Why? Because she loved our country, she believed in American greatness, and was willing to sacrifice the separation from her children and family to answer the call of duty. I know some of you in this chamber can understand that feeling because you have served. For the others that may not have had the privilege of serving in the military, I can only ask you to support your friends and neighbors that answer that call. That young lady happened to be my granddaughter. Excuse me. I can't be more prouder. Thank you, body, for this, and I encourage your support. And I ask my remarks be spread across the journal.
Let's take a motion to adopt the resolution.
Okay, motion to adopt, sorry.
Body, you've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
And I ask my remarks be spread across the journal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion passes without objection. So ordered. Thank you, Representative Blex. House Bill 2313 appears on the consent calendar for the 3rd day. Is there objection? Seeing none, it will be advanced to final action. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2313 by the Committee on Veterans and Military, an act concerning property taxation relating to motor vehicles, allowing Kansas National Guard and reservist members who are in good standing to receive a property tax exemption for up to 2 motor vehicles.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2313. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Epley votes aye. Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Ballard is in. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2313, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2039 by Representative Hubert, an act concerning education relating to civics instruction requiring students to pass a civics examination for high school graduation.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2039. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Reminder that members will be in their seats on final action. As every member had an opportunity to record their vote, Representative Epley votes aye. Representative Humphreys votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Clayton votes nay. Are there any further changes of vote? Seeing none, 69 having voted in favor and 54 against the passage of House Bill 2039, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2058 by the Committee on Federal State Affairs, an act concerning firearms relating to the Personal and Family Protection Act, recognition of licenses issued by other jurisdiction, authorizing the issuance of alternative license during declared state of disaster emergency.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2058. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Ruiz on an explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I voted no on House Bill 2058. You've heard it before, the usual arguments used to justify purchasing and carrying a gun. They are any law-abiding citizen, and I should have the right to protect myself and my family. And it has worked. This propaganda has been used by the gun industry to instill fear that somehow someone is always out to hurt you and or your family. I use the word industry correctly here because the gun industry is huge. And I'm sure the gun industry is very pleased with the passage of this bill, and we will reward many in this room. This is a bad bill, especially given our current political climate that perpetuates nationalism and racial division. It is also a bad bill given all of the information we have heard regarding the high rate of suicide.
Representative, your time is up. Representative Hoy on an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I vote no on House Bill 2058, a far-reaching and dangerous bill. Why would we allow 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to load and hide handguns that they can't legally purchase at federally licensed gun dealers? Lowering the concealed carry permitting age puts young Kansans and their families at risk. Crimes are more serious and deadly when guns are involved. Why did this bill stall in 2018? I remember because I was here at the Capitol on Valentine's Day when a 19-year-old former student shot and killed 17 children and teachers. If enacted, it won't be a crime for 19-year-old former students to carry handguns into K-12 schools.
Are there any further explanations of vote? Seeing none, does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Wahhabism, do you have an explanation of vote, or are you changing your vote? Changes to no. Are there any further changes of vote? Seeing none, 85 having voted in favor and 38 against the passage of House Bill 2058, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
That's Bill number 2085 by the Committee on Education, an act concerning post-secondary education, creating students' right to know, relating to the publication of certain information regarding post-secondary education.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2085. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Stodgdale votes aye. Representative Chuck Smith votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2085, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2088 by the Committee on Federal and State Affairs, an act concerning children and minors relating to procedures and investigations of child abuse or neglect.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2088. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Stodgdale votes aye. Representative French votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 121 having voted in favor and 2 against the passage of House Bill 2088, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, clerk will read.
House Bill number 2126 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning adult care facilities relating to civil liability for COVID-19 claims, providing immunity therefrom, modifying the definition of adult care facility.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2126. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Lehan votes no. Representative Schreiber votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none. 85 having voted in favor, 37 against, with 1 abstention on the passage of House Bill 2126, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
Substitute for House Bill number 2196 by the Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, an act concerning employment security, creating the Unemployment Compensation Modernization and Improvement Council, providing for an audit to be conducted by the council, providing for development of a new unemployment insurance information technology system, claimant tax information, website publication of trust fund data, maximum benefit period, charging of employer accounts for benefits paid, employment and security board of review and emergency expansion thereof, employer contribution rate determination and schedules, abolishing the employment security interest assessment fund, creating employer accounts for fraudulent or erroneous payments, transferring monies from the state general fund to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund for improper benefit payments, services performed by petroleum landmen, lesser employment unit employee leasing restrictions, shared work compensation program, establishing the reemployment plan, providing for job search and job matching assistance to claimants' employers, providing for workforce training program availability for claimants, making and concerning appropriations for the fiscal years ending June 30, 2021 and 2022.
This constitutes final action on the longest titled bill of the year, House Bill 2196. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Bishop votes no. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Sawyer on an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no. While I applaud and approve of the work that the committee has done to try to modernize and improve the Department of Labor, I cannot in good conscience vote for a bill that cuts unemployment benefits and complicates the process. The governor has already included money for modernization in her budget, but this bill will become a roadblock for Kansans who desperately need help during a pandemic when they need help more than ever. I cannot in good conscience vote for this bill.
Are there any further explanations of vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 87 having voted in favor and 36 against the passage of House Bill 2196, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2218 by Representative Berquist, an act concerning the Kansas State Police Health Care Commission, changing membership thereon to include a current and retired state employee enrolled in the State Health Care Benefits Program Group Health Insurance Medical Plan.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2218. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Williams votes aye. Representative Bishop votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2218, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2224 by the Committee on Federal State Affairs, an act concerning public health relating to infectious disease testing, crimes in which bodily fluids may have been transmitted from one person to another, expanding the definition of infectious disease.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2224. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Bishop votes aye. Representative Hubert votes aye. Representative Bourgeon votes aye. Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 117 having voted in favor and 6 against the passage of House Bill 2224, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2227 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning courts relating to orders issued by the Chief Justice to secure health and safety during a disaster emergency, suspension of deadlines or time limitations, authorizing suspension during a state of local disaster emergency, suspension of verification requirements under the revised Kansas Code for Care of Children, use of electronic audio-visual communication to expeditiously resolve pending cases.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2227. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Esau? Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. Representative Bourgeon votes aye. Representative Dotson votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Fairchild with an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I vote no on HB 2227. While I support the aspect of this bill which allows for cases to be heard virtually, I believe this bill gives the Chief Justice too much power. At the very least, I think there should be some sort of independent board put in place to review the Chief Justice's decisions. There needs to be checks and balances on the Chief Justice's power.
Does any other member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 113 having voted in favor and 10 against the passage of House Bill 2227, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2245 by the Committee on Transportation, an act concerning transportation relating to the division of vehicles, authorizing the division of vehicles to collect emergency contact information, allowing individuals to list emergency contact information on applications for driver's licenses, instruction permits, and non-driver's identification cards, permitting law enforcement agencies to use emergency contact information in emergency situations.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2245. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Coleman votes aye. Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2245, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2295 by the Committee on Transportation, an act concerning driver's licenses relating to commercial driver's licenses, exempting municipal motor grader vehicle operators from the Kansas Uniform Commercial Driver's License Act requirements.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2295. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. Representative Jacobs votes aye. Representative Gartner votes aye. Representative Sawyer votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 122 having voted in favor and 1 against the passage of House Bill 2295, The same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2379 by the Committee on Insurance and Pensions, an act concerning transportation relating to peer-to-peer vehicle sharing, establishing insurance requirements, liability, record-keeping requirements, consumer protection provisions, enacting the Peer-to-Peer Vehicle Sharing Program Act.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2379. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Gartner votes aye. Representative Susan Ruiz votes aye. Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. Representative Hubert votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Has every member had an opportunity, has any member desired to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2379, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2416 by the Committee on Federal State Affairs, an act concerning governmental response to certain emergencies relating to the Kansas Emergency Management Act, modifying the procedure for the declaration and extension of a state of disaster emergency, extending the time of initial state of disaster emergency, limiting powers granted to the governor during a state of disaster emergency, authorizing the Legislative Coordinating Council and the Legislature to take certain actions related to a state of disaster emergency, prohibiting the governor or the State Board of Education from closing private schools during a state of disaster emergency, adding 911 dispatch center personnel to the definition of emergency responder.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2416. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Topliker votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Sawyer on an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no. Well, I appreciate the work, a lot of work, the hard work the chairman has put into this. This bill puts up too many roadblocks and makes it too difficult for any executive to deal with an emergency. My fear is that in the future, the governor, regardless of who it is, which party, it'll make it more difficult when they have to deal with a tornado, a flood, a fire, or another pandemic. When emergency happens, the executive branch has to be able to act swiftly to help out Kansans in need. My fear is this bill will hurt Kansans in the future. I must vote no.
Representative Burris on an explanation of vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote yes on HB 2416, violating Section 7 of the Kansas Constitution's Bill of Rights and targeting Christendom. The governor ordered churches closed and sought to regulate worship, yet Section 7 has no pandemic or other emergency exception. Also, what's the good of being protected from an emergency if your livelihood is arbitrarily deemed non-essential and consequently you cannot pay bills? You face losing your vehicle or your home or both. You can barely feed your family and you're unemployed or underemployed, and you never receive your unemployment benefits. HB 2416 takes steps toward protecting Kansans from unconstitutional, overbroad, overbearing, and unnecessary gubernatorial emergency action.
Representative Jacobs on an explanation of vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote yes on HB 2416. Being cautiously optimistic about the outcome of the new chemo restrictions, I do recognize the pertinent work that must be fashioned in the conference committee to further ensure the provisions and protections that confirm the liberties of the people. I do expect that government that swore to support the U.S. Constitution and the Kansas Bill of Rights would be mindful that constitutional liberties must not be infringed upon ever again in the state of Kansas. Patrick Henry said you ought to be extremely cautious, watchful, jealous of your liberty, for instead of securing your rights, you may lose them forever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Samsel on an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no on House Bill 2416. For the first time in Kansas, this bill would manage serious but non-emergency situations through an emergency management statute. This is a fundamental, perilous, and, as presently written, permanent mistake. Experience is the surest standard to test this breathtaking shift of power from the people's duly elective legislature to the governor and a 7-member legislative coordinating council. For many trying months in 2020, this entrustment of power hindered the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of Kansans. Although undeniably well-intended, it silenced 121 state representatives and 37 state senators. 96% of the legislature could not govern. With utmost care, I respectfully resist. Representative Samsel.
Are there any further explanations of vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? I'm sorry. Representative Leon, do you have an explanation? She would like to change her vote to present. Are there any further changes of vote? We have another explanation of vote. Clerk will read.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no on House Bill 2416. The legislature should be focused on helping Kansas that are suffering from the pandemic, but instead this bill focuses on stripping the governor's power to effectively lead Kansans through a pandemic and other natural disasters. The Kansas Supreme Court has held that the governor has executive authority, forming the basis of the governor's ability to deal with a statewide crisis. It does not rely on other legislative action to empower the governor with any executive authority. Although I believe in checks and balances of government, I strongly question whether or not this is a legislative overreach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representatives Carmichael, Keither, Woodard, Neighbor, Wynn, Curtis, Victors,
Are there any further explanations of vote? Does any other member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 81 having voted in favor, 40 against the passage of House Bill 2416, same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes the majority leader for a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading of General Orders.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Speaker appoints Representative Rajas to chair the Committee of the Whole.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and just a few bills are what's between us and enjoying what's the rest of this beautiful day. The first item up for business, Senate Bill 47. Please keep the dull roar to a dull. Purpose of carrying Senate Bill 47, the chair recognizes Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Senate Bill 47. We've seen this bill, the contents, maybe 3 times. It passed the Senate this year 39-0. I believe it passed the House. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
Last year, it passed the House 118-2, I believe. This is the Kansas Taxpayer Protection Act, and it really requires, after January 1st, 2022, the key is paid tax returners who prepare and sign a tax return. They would have to identify themselves, and if they don't by an ID number, they could be assessed a civic penalty of $50 per return with a maximum of $25,000 in civil penalties. This is a good bill. We want to protect Kansans against unscrupulous paid tax preparers. So I urge your support. But, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment.
All right. Is it? Let's show us. Is it a short one?
Mr. Chairman, this amendment is just technical in nature. In 2 places, we're going to add January 1st, 2022 for the effective date of this bill. With that, I would stand for questions.
The clerk will read.
Page 1, line 27, by striking on and after January 1, 2022. And then page 4, after line 17, after by inserting January 1, 2022.
Is there anyone to speak to the amendment? Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Body, this is just a technical amendment. They unintentionally put the enactment date into the statute, and it needs to be in the very last section of the bill, so we're just trying to clean up the drafting language. But this is a friendly amendment. I would encourage your support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else want to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Gardner, you may close.
Mr. Chairman, I move my amendment.
You have heard the motion by Representative Gardner to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Motion passes. Back on the bill, to speak to the bill, Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would encourage the body's support for this bill. The carrier did a fine job of explaining exactly what the bill does and why we need it. And we've seen this bill before, and it, as many other things, got lost in the pandemic mess. So we'll try to get it through this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Gardner, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee rises and reports, it reports Senate Bill 47 as amended favorably for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Gardner to report Senate Bill 47 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Next item up for business is Senate Bill 13, or we'll call, the chair recognizes Speaker Hawkins.
Majority Leader.
I'm sorry, Majority Leader, sorry.
Get everybody messed up when you call me Speaker. Body, we're going to pass over this bill because we're waiting on some amendments. So in accordance with House Rule 1903, I move that Senate Bill 13, appearing under the order of business, general orders, be passed over and retain a place on the calendar.
You've heard the motion by Leader Hawkins. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item of business is House Bill 2239. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2239, the chair recognizes Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move the adoption of the committee report.
You have heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. The committee report is adopted. Please continue.
In 1987, the legislature decided to allow for carryback losses, meaning that if a company, carryback losses for companies, which means that if a company loses money, that they can carry that forward for the next 10 years and taking their loss. Last year, a bill with 20 years was passed by the House and by the Senate and was merged together with other issues. The governor vetoed that, not because of this provision, but because of other issues. This year in committee, it was changed from 20 years to indefinitely. The thought process is that first, that if you are making a decision for a company to take the losses, you give them the maximum authority so that they can use that to create more jobs and to buy more equipment here in Kansas. Gives them an opportunity for better business decisions. In addition, this allows us to be in conformity with the federal government, which we may have further discussions about during the session. I'd be happy to stand for any questions. There is the fiscal note, which in 2029, it will have an annual fiscal note of $1.9 million is what's projected. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
We ask colleagues to keep your conversations low. If you need to take them out in the hallway, please do, so everybody can have an opportunity to hear. To speak on the bill, we recognize Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Body, I would encourage your support for this bill as well. This is actually a bill that just a moment. I think so. I just wanted to clarify that the fiscal note on this, we got the fiscal note for the bill is on the 20-year. We changed it to indefinite. And it did not change the fiscal note any because it starts in fiscal year 2029 and it just extends those losses out. There was also a comment made in our calendar this morning that I wanted to clear up. These losses are not transferable. If there is a merger between companies, a company that has some of these net operating loss carryovers, and there is a merger where a company takes over that business, those are absorbed into the new business, but they're not transferred if a business closes or if it just sells. So that question was in calendar, and I wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing no one else, Representative Helgerson, you may close.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when committee rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2239 favorable as amended.
You have heard the motion by Representative Helgerson to report House Bill 2239 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Next item up for business is House Bill 2231. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2231, the chair recognizes Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no committee amendments.
Please continue.
I rise before the body to present House Bill 2231. This bill was introduced by the Commerce Committee and the request of the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. House Bill 2231 concerns existing Kansas Statute 215838, established in 2012, which covers pyramid schemes, one of our favorites. This change would put in place additional language adopted by 26 other states. Just to remind everyone of what constitutes a pyramid scheme, this is where compensation is derived primarily from the introduction of other persons into a business plan rather than from the sales of goods and services. This change would exclude from the crime of conducting a pyramid promotional scheme those plans in which participants give consideration in return for the right to receive compensation based upon purchases of goods, services, or intangible property. Now, this is provided that the plan or operation does not cause inventory loading. This is one of the elements that was clarified in this bill. So, inventory loading is the encouragement by a plan or operation to have the independent salesperson purchase inventory in an amount that exceeds the amount that the salesperson can expect to reasonably sell or to use or to consume in a reasonable period of time. So this bill adds clarification to two different things. One is compensation, which is essentially cash. The other one defines consideration, again, for consideration of payment of cash or the purchases of goods and services. In the committee hearing, there were no amendments, there were no opponents, and the proponents did include the direct sales operations and all of those people that you think might be in that category. The fiscal note shows no fiscal effect on operations. The Office of the Judicial Administration indicates the bill would have a negligible effect on the fiscal branch. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be happy to stand for questions.
To speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, the previous speaker did a good job describing the bill. I did express some concerns regarding the direct selling culture in general when we were in committee. I do feel like direct selling businesses often unfairly target stay-at-home mothers, and they do end up with extra inventory. While this bill does address some of the major inventory loading problems, I would like us to look at legislation in the future Legislature to tighten some of the regulations regarding these companies, because oftentimes this is sort of a bill of goods that's sold to stay-at-home moms that allows them to have it all. And usually people end up getting stuck holding the bill. So I do urge your support, and I also urge us to continue working on this as we move forward in the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to use both mics. Buddy, I've been here for a spell, long enough to have made mistakes. I can probably count on one hand, though, the number of votes that I've made that I wish I could have back. But one of them was, I don't know, 2014, where we issued a bill to protect people from being ripped off by roofing companies. I know this isn't a huge impact thing. It doesn't keep me up at nights, but it's still a vote that I made wrong. What we were trying to do was certainly noble. Absolutely. We want to protect people from being ripped off. That makes perfect sense. But what we did instead, the unintended consequence, was to create a barrier to entry for new companies, new roofing companies. Now, it certainly wasn't our plan, but that's what we achieved. So I regret that vote. And now, just a few years later, look what we have in front of us. You know, probably that same year that I made that vote, there was a representative who explained to me that the issue is never the issue. And that's exactly the case that we're dealing with here. The goal on this bill, in my opinion, is protectionist. All right. Do we want people ripped off? No, of course not. I don't want people ripped off. Of course not. That's ridiculous. But what we're doing instead is providing a barrier to entry for new companies coming in. In fact, in the bill, you can see that the definition of inventory loading isn't exactly spelled out. It's an amount that exceeds the amount the salesperson can expect to resell or use or to consume in a reasonable time period. So we use the reasonable man identifier there. What that actually means is I'll see you in court, all right? Because you're gonna have to fight it out in court. Is this a reasonable amount? Is this an unreasonable amount? And so what we'll have is a large company who can certainly afford an attorney to fight off a competitor who's wanting to enter the market. I know a lot of us have probably run on the premise that capitalism is good, crony capitalism is bad. Crony capitalism doesn't present itself as crony capitalism. Understand this. It presents itself as we want to help people. We want to protect people. We want to keep people from being ripped off. And that's how it starts. You'll notice that the proponents of the bill, in the proponent testimony, you heard established companies. Well, and the Kansas Chamber, and I don't blame them. They represent existing members. But as proponents, we had existing companies. What we didn't have are people who had been ripped off by pyramid schemes. If that's who we're protecting, don't you think that would be a proponent for the bill? But we didn't have that testimony. Now, there was one other piece I've kind of picked up some rules to go by when through the years. The issue, that one was number one, by the way. But close following that is, if the premise for a bill, if the defense of a bill is based upon the ignorance and apathy of the public, that's a bad bill. That's bad law. Our representative republic is kind of based upon the wisdom of the public. I mean, Arguments could be made. Maybe they don't always make the right decisions. But the basis of our government is tied to the wisdom of the body. And so in order to protect them, we have to first assume that we're doing what's best for them, whether they like it or not. And that sort of parental control by government is something that I will never be a fan of. Do I want people ripped off? Do I have a love for pyramid schemes? Of course not. But I also don't have a love for bad law. And this is a bad law. So I urge the body that when we vote on this, to please defeat this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Dotson, you may close.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I won't belabor the point, but I appreciate very much the comments of the two previous speakers, all good points, but I would differ in a large extent with the previous speaker. You know, before we had no definition at all, and at least now we have the definition that does not allow inventory loading. And that's one of the things that gets people into trouble real fast. When somebody sells you something and sends you 1,000 of them to distribute, and also expects you to bring in other people to help you distribute those products, you have a problem, usually beginning very quickly. So I would urge you to consider the goodness in this bill and the goodness in that statute. With that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the body rises to report, it reports House Bill 2231 favorable for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Dodson to report House Bill 2231 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Chair recognizes Majority Leader. No, we don't. We can keep moving? Okay. Next item of business is Senate Bill 13. For the purpose of carrying Senate Bill 13, the chair recognizes Representative Smith. Representative Adam Smith. House will stand at ease for just a moment. The House will return to order to carry Senate Bill 13. The chair recognizes Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were committee amendments. I move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. The committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you. First of all, body, thank you very much. Completely my fault. That's what happens when you don't get much sleep and don't get any lunch and you get a shot in the morning. So thank you for your tolerance and patience. Committee, Senate Bill 13 is the property tax transparency bill. And I will briefly go through the sections of the bill here. Section 1 is really the heart of this bill. It's designed to inform taxpayers and provide accountability measures for units of government that levy property taxes. It accomplishes this in two different ways. By defining a new term in statute called the revenue neutral rate and requiring a taxpayer notification that will serve as an estimated tax bill that will show all of the property tax on each of your parcels. Now, you might ask, why do we need this? Property taxes, your property tax bill, when you get that statement, that number is a very complicated process and it's difficult to understand. There's a lot of moving parts. First thing you'll get in March is a valuation notice, and that tells you what your valuation on your property is, but it doesn't tell you anything about your property taxes. You can see if the value on your home or your business is going up, staying the same, or going down. That's the first piece of the puzzle. Then throughout the year, local governments will begin to work on their budgets. And about August or September, you'll see all these budget notifications start popping up in the newspaper. And you can even go to their budget hearings, but that still doesn't tell you anything about what your property taxes are going to do, because your property taxes are a function of the relation between the two. The budget can stay the same. Your valuation on your property can stay the same, but your taxes could still go up. And this happens frequently in rural western Kansas counties because guess what? We actually lose valuation. Oil and gas, ag farmland, things like that, when that valuation drops, all the residential owners, the business owners, their proportion of the total valuation goes up, so they do see an increase. So even though your valuation has stayed the same, even though the budget may have stayed the same, your taxes can still go up. It's just extremely difficult to understand. The process that we have right now is very transparent. I've got my valuation. I see what the local governments are spending. It's very transparent, but it's not very informative or easy to understand. And that's why I really think that the notification piece in this bill, the estimate of your property taxes, is so critical. By the time, under the current system, by the time you get that property tax bill, it's too late to do anything about it. The budgets are certified, they're set, the hearings have been held, and you missed out. With this new notification, taxpayers will see that estimate in September or even earlier, rather than getting their bill in December about a week or two before it's due. Under the current system, you know what your taxes are only after the budgets have already been adopted. The second important accountability and information piece is the revenue neutral rate, the new term defined in statute. Since property taxes are a little confusing, sometimes taxing jurisdictions can attempt to say that they didn't raise your taxes because they kept the mill levy the same. That argument may be true in respect to the mill levy, but the fact that they did not raise their revenue is a little disingenuous, and that's another piece of this complicated puzzle. Even if the mill levy stays the same and total valuation increases, the amount of money that the mill levy raises will also increase, and therefore taxes are raised. The revenue neutral rate is a simple equation that equals the revenue produced from the property taxes last year, the prior year, divided by the new year, the current year's assessed valuation, to show what the mill levy would be this new year if revenue stayed the same. I promise I won't spend that much time on each section. Section 2 of the bill amends KSA 79-1460 to clarify in statute that no real property shall increase in valuation solely as a result of normal repair, replacement, or maintenance on property, excluding new construction. The way the property valuation process works right now, that is not supposed to happen, but this further codifies that in statute. Section 3 would amend 79-1801 to update the date in which governing bodies must certify to the county clerk their ad valorem tax to be levied under the new revenue neutral rate system. Section 4 amends 79-2024 to authorize county treasurers to set up payment plans. Okay, this is important. This is an interesting piece of the bill. I got some attention there, okay. Currently, county treasurers can set up payment plans for delinquent taxes. This sets it up to allow them to do that for also non-delinquent taxes. Essentially what they're doing is they're setting up a payment plan for all taxpayers regarding their property taxes. The example I used in calendar today, can you imagine if you had to save all of your receipts and pay all of your sales tax for the year at one time? Does anybody know how much sales tax they pay a year? We probably don't, because we pay a little bit at a time every time we make a purchase. This is one of the reasons I feel that property tax is so despised across the state, because they have to write that big check, unfortunately right before Christmas too, usually. Same thing holds true with your income taxes. You get a little bit withheld each time. You never actually see that money, so it's hard to comprehend how much is actually getting paid. You never see it. You never have to write a check for it. Imagine if you had to write a check on April 15th for all of your income tax. I'm sure income tax would be much more despised as well. Not that it isn't already, but what this does, this provision of the bill in Section 4, creates that payment plan for some of those taxpayers that want to put a little in towards that each month, gives the county treasurers the authorization to do that. And I would like to specifically recognize the good representative from Independence, our chair of financial institutions and rural development, for bringing that to this bill. Section 6 also amends KSA 79-2929 to include the revenue neutral rate in the budget publication form the governing bodies must publish in the newspaper. I just want to hit a couple of highlights on Section 1. First of all, you might have received several emails across the course of the last couple months regarding the implementation date. As the bill came to us from the Senate, the implementation date was retroactive to January 1st of 2021. We heard from county clerks, and by the way, I need to give a shout out to all of the county clerks and the County Clerks and Election Officials Association. They were instrumental in helping me craft a lot of the language in this bill, because they're ultimately the ones that have to make this work. I also talked to mayors, city council, county commissioners, library managers, and I listened to them. They had very valid points, but the county clerks I tried to work with a lot, large counties, small counties, because ultimately 95% of this bill is on their shoulders to make this happen. So in House Committee, we amended this bill to push back just the notification piece, because that's the piece that the county clerks were so concerned with, creating software to, well, they don't create the software, their software vendors would have to create the programming to make all this work, and it's just not feasible to try to do it this year. So in the bill, we required only a newspaper publication and a publication on the website, and then in 2022 is when the mailed notification will kick in. Also in this bill is not just the mailed notification, but also electronic notification. If a taxpayer provides their consent to receive this notification via email, they can do so, and that could significantly reduce the cost of printing and postage for the mailing of this notification. Speaking of printing and postage costs, those are also shared proportionately by tax districts. So if you have a tax entity that has a 100 mil levy and you have, or a 99 mil levy, and you have a tax district that's 1 mil levy, that smaller district will only have to pay 1% according to its ratio of that bill. Also included in the bill as it sits right now are exemptions. K-12 schools are exempt, municipal universities are exempt, and tax districts levying less than $100,000 are also exempt. Body, I've got to say, over the course of the last couple of days, I've gotten quite a few emails and phone calls about exemptions. And I don't know if any of you have ever driven on a muddy road before, but if you get a muddy road that's built right, it's kind of got a little curve so the rain runs off. And as long as you can keep it down the middle, you're okay. But once you get off to the edge, it's pretty quick. You're going to be in the ditch, and you got to hit the brakes at some point. And as I sat back in my office after getting all these emails and calls, I'm sitting there wondering, you know, are we heading for the ditch? Because this is exactly the complaint that we have with the current tax lid. There's so many exemptions, it doesn't really function the way it was intended. And therefore, I have an amendment.
Is it long? Large? It seems to be. Care to explain your amendment?
The amendment is long, but it's actually pretty simple. It does two things. It removes all exemptions. Everyone is playing by the same set of rules. And it also creates a fund, a state fund, for 2 years to reimburse for the cost of notification expenses, because that is the main concern that I hear from all these entities that are worried and wanting these exemptions. We're worried about the cost. That is my explanation.
Is there an objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this amendment does a great job of clarifying this bill. We have struggled with property tax and making sure everybody understands it. The transparency with this amendment, when you have a tax increase, I think is vital. I think it's one of the best tax bills we've ever had that I didn't originate. So I hope everybody gets behind this amendment and supports it. I will tell you, there's been a lot of hard work put on this, and I hope nobody fouls up this bill. Thank you.
To speak to the amendment, Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the carrier of the amendment stand for a couple questions, please? Chairman, what you talked about $2 million. Is that for 2 years? And how does the reimbursement from, I assume, the Department of Revenue flow back to the clerks?
Thank you, Representative. The fund that is set up is not a fixed amount of money. In the amendment, it talks about, it's a reimbursement procedure to where the county clerks will submit their receipts and request reimbursement from this state fund. It lasts for 2 years, and then it is sunsetted. In my communications with the County Clerks Association, they did a great job of getting me a lot of data on the estimates of what this would cost, and I didn't get 100% of the counties, so I don't want to mislead the body, but I got over 60 counties, and we were looking just on average. I got a lot of large counties, a lot of small counties. We were looking right around that $1.3, $1.5 million. So $2 million would be, I think, a maximum amount, because the larger counties did get numbers from Johnson County. It's $150,000. A lot of the larger counties had reported, so I don't think that number would grow very much. For small counties like mine, it's $2,000 or $3,000 to mail out this entire notification. Did I answer all your questions? Did I answer all of them?
Yeah, okay. That one. I thought maybe one more. So the money flows back from the Department of Revenue. The clerks send in to the department a reimbursement, a bill, and then they pay the clerks back for that expense until the money runs out. And then if we extend it, we'd have to appropriate additional funds, correct?
As I said, in the amendment, it doesn't actually put a dollar amount on there, so the money won't run out. It just lasts for 2 years. And since we did kick back the notification piece to 2022, they essentially have 3 years to, or the 2 years for the notification cost, and it'll be fiscal years 22 and 23 that would impact.
Just a comment. If we're, two comments. Number one, if we're going to mandate this across the state, I think it's appropriate that we ought to fund for this expense. Number one. The second comment I will make is I'm somewhat concerned about not exempting schools and school districts. I think there are a lot of ramifications that I'm not sure we've taken into account with this amendment. So that would be one of my concerns moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any other member want to speak on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Smith, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did want to, I neglected to respond to the previous speaker also regarding the only expense isn't just for the notifications. I did try to get some numbers nailed down on what the software upgrades would be, because that's another mandate that we've placed on the counties, the county clerks and their systems. The estimates that I received back, I tried really hard to get some by the time we ran it through committee so we would have an idea. I did not. I got an estimate back just this week that said they approximated it to be about anywhere from $2,000 to $2,200 per county. So there will be another expense. The way the county clerks fund that is through a fee that they pay in their dues to the software. So that shouldn't be a hard expense up front. That's kind of absorbed because there's always changes and updates that they make to the software. But body, with that, I will simply move my amendment. Thank you.
You have heard the motion by Representative Smith to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. We are back on the bill. And to speak to the bill, Chair recognizes Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and respectfully, Chairman, I really respect what you just did with this amendment. That took it a long way for me. I would just hope that part of this whole thing is that 125 people out of this House and 40 people over in the other dark side would, everybody received your appraisal this week probably. I would go and challenge that appraisal. And that way you will start learning how this whole system works. Because in the beginning, when your appraisal goes up $1, that affects your taxes. And the other thing I would make the comment on, and I appreciate what the carrier of the bill has done with this as far as the payments, but typically your mortgage, and 70% of the bills that are paid for mortgages are paid through a lender of some kind, and they're going to pay it for you anyhow in December and in March. So making the monthly payments are only going to be good for me if I own my own property. And then the third thing is the challenge that this notification is going to go out to every parcel. And so if I own 5 parcels of land, I'm going to get 5 notices. And that's going to complicate it a little bit as far as how many of those notices go out. For the individual person that just owns one house, not a big deal. If you're a farmer rancher and you own several parcels of land, you're going to get several pieces of paper. So I appreciate what the carrier of this bill has done. I appreciate that amendment. I just think that 90% of or 95% of the people in the state of Kansas don't really understand how this system works. It's loaded on the front side with the appraisals. And last year when this bill came, I tried talking and giving some amendments over on the Senate side and was shut down. And I have tried to put some amendments that you see some appraiser amendments that are bills that I put out. So I think it's more on that front side that needs to be taken care of rather than the other. And then finally, as I have mentioned in my little sermon that I put on your desk, I still think if we get these notices out, and I have, for the last 10 years, sat in on county commissioner meetings and township meetings and city board meetings, being on a newspaper person, people don't show up. And so I think you'll be sending out these notices, it'll cost money, and people won't show up. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
To speak on the bill, the chairman recognizes Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Life is good today. I met Ms. Moderna a second time, and I'm feeling all right. Body, I apologize that I'm down here as often as I am. I'm trying hard to stay in my seat, but for a couple of reasons I need to explain to you. As some of these tax bills develop, you'll see more of me. Number one, for 27 years I served as a local official. Number two, for 25 years, my principal legal practice was representing taxpayers on property tax appeals. And thirdly, I don't have the privilege of sitting on the tax committee where I could make many of these points in committee. So I do apologize. You probably already see me more than you want, but I have a hard time resisting. First of all, I want to say thank you to the representative from the 80th District. What he put on our desk is rather lengthy, but if you have time, please read it. And if you don't have time to really thoroughly read it, read his points of emphasis. He has important points of emphasis in here that I totally agree with. I have one question for the carrier of the bill, and then I will make my comments about the bill, if he would yield. Is it not true that we're talking about notices and our discussion seems to be hanging on that, but is it not true that there are provisions in this bill to repeal the current tax lid on local authorities?
Thank you, and I apologize for the oversight. I did not mention that when I was going through my section by section. This bill does, effective January 1st, 2021, repeal the current tax lid in 2925C.
Just a minor oversight. It's important to me because that's the reason I'll be voting yes. I don't know anyone here that hasn't sometimes said they believe in local control, but when I say I believe in local control, I mean it. I trust my elected local officials to represent the people who elect them, and I trust the people who elect them to turn on them when they do wrong. So I'll be voting for this bill, but please don't go home and brag up this legislation as being some terrific answer to people's lack of information. I do not like the fiscal note attached to this in terms of what I think we're going to get for that money. Nonetheless, because of the provision we just spoke of, I will be voting aye. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To speak on the bill, the chairman recognizes Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel a lot like my friend from Topeka. It's like, oh, here he is again. You're right, here I am again. I'm sorry, and I am way out of my lane, whether it's on the crown of the road or the rut or the ditch. Taxes aren't my thing. But this is a big concern for people in my town. Increasing valuations of property result in extra money for the city council to spend. And they don't ever send it back. They don't reduce the mill levy. They take it like candy and spend it over and over and over again. I don't like the fact that this bill takes off the property tax cap. What we really ought to be doing is getting rid of exemptions to the property tax cap so that it really means something, so that it is a constraint, so that it takes into account increased valuations and compares that to the total budget and limits the tendency of some city council members to build things with their names on it, to tear down the old and spend money building the new so that they end up with a brass plaque with their name on it for all eternity. Now, I could talk about the specifics of what's going on in my town, but that's probably not of a lot of interest to you. I would much prefer to see a bill that took off the exemptions and put in a meaningful property tax lid. But that's not what the Senate chose to do. And so now I have to look at, should we enact a piece of legislation that repeals a tax lid bill that frankly hasn't worked because it's just like our sales tax laws, we got too many exemptions. Should I vote for that in exchange for something that will truly inform the voters what the city council is doing to them year after year after year? And so I've thought about that, and I think I'm going to go ahead and support this bill. I would much rather see a bill that put a meaningful property tax lid in place. But given this is what the Senate sent to us, given the fact that voters will now know exactly what's happening at the candy jar of property tax valuation, and given the fact that city council members will answer to those voters at the election, I'm going to support this bill, and I hope you will too. Thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, I know the chairman needs to sit down. No, you sit down. I just wanted to say something, Mr. Chairman. This bill, when it came over to the House, wasn't a very good bill from the Senate. And with really leadership from our chairman and the tax committee worked very, very hard on making this a much, much better bill. And I believe this amendment, which the chairman has been working on for a couple days anyway, does make this a better bill. I have a library, Shawnee County Library in Topeka, and they were calling me, how are we going to pay for this notification? It's very expensive. Well, with this amendment, they won't have to worry about it. It'll be taken care of. So with that, I support the amendment and support the underlying bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Jennings to speak on the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman. I appreciate a lot of what's been said here about city councils and county commissions and how they have tended over the years to focus on the mill levy. If you go to a county commission or a city council conference and you listen to them talk, what they're really focused on is we kept this tax rate the same, even though the assessed valuation, in fact, does tend to climb in most communities and certainly does tend to climb across the state. This transparency piece only goes to cities, counties, and all the local units of government, but there's one big unit of government in the state of Kansas that's not mentioned in this, and that's the state of Kansas. The state of Kansas assesses 20 mills for education, 1 mill for educational building fund, and a half a mill for the state institutional building fund, 21 and a half mills. And what you'll find on these levy notices that you get from the counties, all they say is that's the mill levy that's being charged, and they don't tell you how much it went up year over year. And I wonder if you can guess how much that 20 mills goes up year over year. Because I've been doing a little research on this for a couple years, and it's staggering. So let me tell you, from 2016 to 2017, there was $31.8 million additional dollars revenue that came to the state, a 5.14% increase year over year. In 2017 to 2018, an additional $30.2 million came to the state out of the 20 mill levy, a 4.64% increase year over year. And this is what counties tend to do. They tend to look at the mill levy and apply it to the assessed valuation, but we're guilty too. We do the same thing. Over the last 20 years, the amount of money that has been raised year over year on average since the 20 mill levy rate went into place is 3.5% a year. And in most of those years, that exceeded the cost of living increase that we've seen. The increase in assessed valuation comes from two sources, though, not just reappraised property, but new property, additional property. The tax base is broadened by construction. When I go out and visit with folks around my community, I don't hear them talking much about sales tax. I don't hear them talking much at all, really, about income tax. But the one thing we all hear all the time is our property tax is too high, and you ought to do something about it. And it's pretty easy to say, oh, that's your city, that's your county, that's your cemetery district, that's your whatever. But it's been a long time since we've had anything that's touched on property taxes come across the floor in this building. And quite frankly, the 9 years that I've been here, we've been piddling around trying to control local units of government and what they do with property taxes. And I think it's about time that we kind of take care of ourselves in this process as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Is it long or short, Representative?
Relatively short, could be explained in about 30 seconds.
Well, it's long, okay, so go and explain.
Sure. This amendment does one thing. It provides that for property taxes for this year on your November, December bills, the statewide mill levy of 20 would be reduced to 19. And next year, the following November, the statewide mill levy that would then be at 19 would be reduced to 18. This would amount to a 10% reduction in the rate of property tax charged to the people of the state of Kansas. That's the explanation. You want me to go on?
Is there an objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? There's objection, the clerk will read.
Page 9, following line 24 by inserting Section 7. KSA 2020 Sup 725142 is hereby amended to read as follows. A, the Board of Education of each school district shall levy an ad valorem tax upon the taxable tangible property of the school district in the school year specified in subsection B for the purpose of, number 1, financing that portion of the school district's general fund budget that is not financed by any other source provided by law. 2, paying a portion of the cost of operating and maintaining public schools in partial fulfillment of the constitutional obligation of the legislature to finance the educational interests of the state. And 3, with respect to any redevelopment school district established prior to July 1, 1997, pursuant to KSA 12-1771 and amendments thereto, paying a portion of the principal and interest on bonds issued by cities under authority of KSA 12-1774 for the financing of redevelopment projects upon property located within the school district. B, the tax required under subsection A shall be levied at a rate of, number 1, 19 mills in school year 2021-22, number 2, 18 mills in school year 22-23. C, the proceeds from the tax levied by a district under authority of this section, except the proceeds of such tax levied for the purpose described in subsection A3, shall be remitted to the state treasurer in accordance with the provisions of KSA 754215 and amendments thereto. Upon receipt of each such remittance, the state treasurer shall deposit the entire amount in the state treasury to the credit of the state school district finance fund. D, no school district shall proceed under KSA 79, 1964, 1964A, 1964B, and amendments thereto. Also on page 9 in line 26 after 2929, insert KSA 2020 Sup 72 5142, renumber sections accordingly, and on page 1 in the title in line 10 after the semicolon by inserting authorizing the continuation of and decreasing the statewide levy for schools. In line 11 after 79 2929, insert KSA 2020 Sup 72 5142.
Representative Jennings, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this amendment is adopted, in the first year, it will save Kansans $35.6 million in property tax. In the second year, it will save Kansans $71.2 million. You know that we have a budget item of $54 million a year to provide ad valorem property tax relief that is never funded. And this will assure that there is property tax relief for businesses, for families, for seniors. We can stay on the gravy train of $30+ million a year increases and provide no relief, or we can say in an incremental and fiscally responsible manner that we can go ahead and give property tax relief to Kansans. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
To speak on the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm getting tired of being up here already today. But would the carrier stand for a couple questions? Today, does that money, where does that money flow through to? Does it go to fund education?
That money currently goes from counties to the state treasury. It is a part of education funding. It accounts for approximately $700 million of the $4 billion that goes into education annually.
So, Representative, the 70 million, 50 some million the first year, 70 some million the second year or combined, if that doesn't flow through to education anymore, how do we make up that difference to fund education adequately and equitably?
So education funding is determined by the school funding formula. That becomes the obligation of the state to fund education and how that's determined. The $700+ million right now does not pay the entire bill. So it would shift then to a slightly greater degree, dependency upon income, corporate income, sales taxes, and all other revenue that might go into the state general fund. And I think what's important to understand about this is if we funded what we have promised to fund in the past, the $54 million a year of local ad valorem property tax reduction, that money would be taken out of the state general fund. This plan takes less than $54 million. In 2 years, it still uses less than $108 million that would have been the aggregate of the 2 years of ad valorem property tax relief that's provided for statutorily. And by the time you get into the third year, the growth in the assessed valuation continuing at the same rate that it is now will be a push.
Well, my concern is, I think you pointed out, if you're taking that money, it's no longer going to the state coffers, to the general fund. You had mentioned we're going to have to make it up someplace in sales tax, income tax, corporate tax, some tax. So, I mean, you're depleting one revenue stream, and then you're going to ask everybody or to increase some taxes on your constituents to make up the difference. Is that correct?
I believe that's absolutely incorrect. There are any number of tax bills floating around this building now that will grant tax relief to multinational corporations and others, and this becomes a choice. It becomes a choice of tax relief that will be spread among business, people who own homes, and I think is particularly helpful for people who are on fixed incomes.
Well, I don't really totally agree with that assessment, but we do have a lot of tax bills out there with large sums of money allocated or associated with them. But I would think that this is a major, major move to implement via an amendment. And if we're going to take anything like this on, it needs to go through the process, be discussed in front of a committee, the proponents, opponents, and let's come up with a thoughtful version of implementing anything like this going forward. With that, I would urge you to oppose this amendment. Thank you.
To speak to the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Blake Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the previous representative that was talking kind of took some of the words out of my mouth, that this amendment seems like it is very expansive in its scope of what the underlying bill currently is, and I think that there might also be two distinctly different questions that are being proposed here in front of the body. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will challenge germaneness.
The germaneness has been challenged. The Rules Committee will gather. The chair recognizes Rules Chair Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rules Committee has met and we discussed the bill and the amendment. Clearly, they both deal with property tax. One deals with notification requirements of local jurisdiction or local governments. The amendment itself is from Chapter 79, where we have our school finance formula. It's in a sense from the education area. It's an amendment that has to do with the mill levy rate of the state. We went through, we looked, trying to find that second contact, but much like yesterday on the nursing home bill, while they are similar topics, they're different enough, and because they fall in different statutes as well, we couldn't find that second point of contact. Because of that, we find this amendment is not germane.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the finding of the Chair of Rules. And I guess if you really wanted to push it, you could probably challenge that and maybe even suggest that a purely procedural rule within the House has precluded the people of the state of Kansas from enjoying property tax relief. And if I challenge that ruling, it might even be successful. But I would just say this issue needs to be discussed, not next year, this year, as a part of any tax plan that goes forward. With that, I would thank the chair for all the work that he's done on this bill. He's worked hard, and I appreciate his efforts, and I think cities and counties in the end will as well. And I thank you for your attention.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Smith, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that when the body rise and report, it report Senate Bill 13, favorable for passage as amended.
You have heard the motion by Representative Adam Smith to report Senate Bill 13 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Next item up is House Bill 2106. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2106, the chair recognizes Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
Continue.
Members, House Bill 2106 comes from the Committee on Taxation and is a bill to simply set the due date for Kansas corporate tax returns at 30 days after the due date for their federal income tax return. So why do this? As the IRS has recently, in recent years, changed their due date, the Kansas due date will go right along with it without the need for business filers to request extensions or possibly amended returns. Having fewer extension requests and amended returns is obviously a good for the filer as well as good in that it reduces the administrative burden on the Kansas Department of Revenue. This bill, I should point out, only pertains to the filing of taxes, not the due date for the payment of taxes owed, which is why the fiscal note shows the revenue impact to be negligible with only $600 to update forms and instructions. If passed, the provisions of this bill would be applicable to returns for the tax year 2020 and future years. With that, I'm prepared to stand for questions.
To speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's getting old already, but the representative of the Tax Committee did a great job explaining this. This is a good bill. We already do it. It's just codifying it in statute. So ask for your support. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Turner, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I move that when the committee rises and reports, that it report HB 2106 favorably for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Turner to report House Bill 2106 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Up next, House Bill 2405. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2405, the chair recognizes Representative Stephen Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I'd move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. The committee report is adopted. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2405 deals with the authorization of up to a $1 billion bond for the purchase of refinancing a portion of the CAPER's unfunded liability. In a simple form, our debt that we owe within CAPER's is at 7.75%. Thanks to the urging of my colleague from Shawnee County, he said, look at where rates are currently, and they're pretty low. They were under 3. They may still be under 3, but we're going to say right now they're around 3%. So the difference is you borrow at 7.75 or you borrow at 3%, and your savings on that is the interest cost over time. So 4 to maybe 5% on the amount borrowed. It just makes it easier to pay off the note, and that's the extent of what it does. We have done it before, so we have a small track record to run on, an issue in 2004 and one in 2015. In 2015, we did $1 billion, and the rate that we had at that time was 4.68, and it is a positive $272 million. On both issues, we are positive $734 million above the costs to borrow. We're fortunate in Kansas to have the Kansas Developmental Finance Authority, which is a very cost-effective way to be able to issue the bonds. And CAPER's is also very efficient in how they invest the money, and they have a solid track record for investing it. So that's the key piece that it tries to do. A couple of things it does not do. It does not eliminate debt. There's no smoke and mirrors magic. One piece that will show is that the funded ratio of CAPER's will change from 71 point to 76 point something percent. I would submit the debt is still the same. While that is a fact, it's still the same debt. There's about $6 billion remaining in unfunded liability in the state school group, and between the bond and that liability, the debt is still the same. The other thing that this is not is reamortization. Reamortization would deal with how we pay the UAL. I will say they touch each other in that we are setting up a particular schedule to pay this off, and it is paid off over 30 years. 30 years gives us a better chance to be confident in achieving our expected rate of return. And I will also say I am more comfortable borrowing and spreading the debt out at a 3% rate than I am at a 7.75% rate. I'd love to talk about that more. So if anyone has a question, please bring it. I fear I may be the only one that would love to talk about it more. So I will stop at that. Thank you, Representative. I appreciate it, and I'll look forward to the question. One thing that was wisely pointed out to me earlier is that there is downside risk. And I thought, yes, I should talk about that a little more. And there's two key ways to categorize the downside risk in investing in the market. And the one is the one we look at most readily, which is that every year there's a chance that this goes down. And if any of you are statisticians, there's all of that data with CAPER's. So the variance of the portfolio by standard deviation is 10.18%. If you apply that to the expected return, you expect to lose money about 1 year in 6 on a 1-year basis. But the key is CAPER's has a longer time frame than you or I in investing. And over that time frame, time reduces risk. And you can also calculate that relationship. Over a 5-year period, one standard deviation down would be above 3% at any of the hurdle rates that we're looking at, and you can adjust the expected return a fair amount and still get there. That would mean that there is a 1 in 6 chance over 5 years of underperforming the borrowing cost that we have. So not zero, not losing money, but underperforming the rate that it costs to borrow. So that tells you that just over a 5-year period, there's an 83% chance that it works. At these rates, you actually achieve a 2 standard deviation chance of outperforming, which is 97.5, as you approach the upper teens and the number of years that you have to invest. But it can be hard to remember that if the first year is your bad year. And so it is useful just to think about, okay, I understand it, but the key is to get a sense of that time. My investing counterparts would tell me over 30 years, your point of entry in the market is not particularly relevant, but it's really relevant in that first month. So that is the chance to get a sense for it. But that time-adjusted piece is critical, and that's, again, why we're looking at 30 years, and I'd love to go into that variance more as well. But looking at what we have done, the likelihood of that outperforming from here, the fact that the rate is 3% versus our previous issue at 4.68%, which has worked for us, I think this provides us another tool. The committee did an amendment, and we changed our rate caps. So going forward, if we choose to send this forward today, we would go to the Senate, obviously, and it takes close to 3 months to get from here to a bond issue. So it's a while before the money shows up. But our next discussions will be how much and what's the cap. So right now we say we'll do $1 billion if the interest rate is under 3.5%. And if it is not, we are willing to do up to $500 million, half of that, up to 3 3/4. I would probably be willing to go up to 4%, and that's probably where I personally would draw the cap. But we'll continue to talk about that, and I'm sure it will be adjusted in conference committees as we move forward. But that is largely what the bill does. I do, as I looked through the process and how it works with KDFA and funding the bonds, in case anyone wanted to ask that question, and reading the bill last night, I did find a technical amendment, and so with that, Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. Clerk will read.
Page 2, line 9, by striking finance and inserting finance.
Representative Johnson.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. That is it. It happened to say fiance on page 2, line 9. We indeed meant finance. So this amendment does the overwhelmingly huge job of changing the spelling of that word. And with that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Is there anyone wishing to speak on the amendment? Representative Neighbor.
Just for clarification, this is definitely cleanup because otherwise we'd be looking for the fiance instead of the finance. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Johnson, you may close. House will be at ease for a moment. Now, Representative Johnson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would move my amendment.
You have heard the motion by Representative Stephen Johnson to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We're back on the bill. To speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I'd like to tell you about one of my neighbors. His name's Jeff Fagan. Jeff Fagan's a corrections officer at the Lansing Correctional Facility. And early in the pandemic, Jeff got COVID-19. At his home, his mom, his elderly mom, lives with him, and he gave it to her. And she was deathly ill, and it's only by the mercy of God that she's still alive. I tell you this story because this same story was repeated 100 times in our district with corrections officers that work at Lansing Correctional Facility. The Lansing Correctional Facility is one of the hottest hot spots in the entire state of Kansas. 920 cases as of today. We were shipping cases from all over the state to Lansing Correctional Facility. You know, they're overstaffed and they're understaffed and they're overworked in the toughest times. But in COVID, they were really just working to the breaking point, and it's just amazing that they were able to hang on. But this job that they do is hard on their bodies and it's hard on their souls, and their retirement needs to reflect the hard work that they do. You know, right now, corrections officers are in capers for corrections. And I know that many times this body has tried to move them over to capers for police and fire. Every single corrections officer that I talk to is adamant about wanting to move over to capers for police and fire. They know that it takes 15 years to vest instead of 5 years, but they want to move because they get to retire at 50 instead of 55. So I introduced a bill in the Insurance Committee to do just that, House Bill 2111. And because of all of the things that our committee had to do, we were not able to get to that bill. But that bill was supported by the Kansas Organization of State Employees. It was supported by the warden of Lansing Correctional Facility because it'll help them retain corrections officers. It was in concept supported by the Secretary of Corrections, though he wouldn't come out until he got word from the governor whether she supported it. And it was obviously, as I said, supported by the corrections officers. And so since we weren't able to get to this bill, Mr. Chair, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears long. Would you like to explain it further?
I would, Mr. Chair, thank you. So this amendment would move Group A capers for corrections members, those corrections officers, into the KP&F system. I think that the bill's germane because it is also about capers, but also because it will, like this bill, mitigate the unfunded liability, because we're going to be taking some people out that are contributing to that unfunded liability. But you're going to have, if he gets the opportunity to come up here, the chair of the the distinguished chair of the Joint Insurance and Pensions Committee is going to come up here and tell you that in 2019 they heard this and decided it shouldn't be done because corrections officers are not law enforcement. So the distinguished representative from Tonganoxie and me today, it was a nice day, so we decided to walk across the street to get some food. And we walked right by the law enforcement memorial. And the names on that memorial includes corrections officers, right alongside KBI agents, highway patrol, sheriffs, deputies, and police officers. So I guess that if you die as a corrections officer, you're a law enforcement officer, but if you live to retirement, you're not. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions.
Is there an objection to waiving of the reading of the amendment? Seeing none. For those to speak on the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And would the carrier stand for a couple of questions? And the two questions that I'd have would be, again, the fiscal note and the impact on the UAL, if you have that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. So the original fiscal note for this bill was about $5 million starting in 2022. But I've made some changes to the bill to reduce that. What I did when I initially did the bill, all of the CAPERS time would just be moved over into KP&F. Now the way this amendment reads is that the calculation for retirement age is based on service in Department of Corrections, but the calculation for benefit is spread across the two. And so based on the bill that failed a couple years ago, I think that the cost is going to be under $2 million now. But they did not get back to me with an analysis once we did this. But what that fiscal note does not cover is the fact that this will allow the Department of Corrections to retain more corrections officers. Right now there's a huge turnover in corrections officers. That's why the warden LCF loves this bill or this amendment, because she loses people to the U.S. penitentiary because their benefits are better. And so that's really incalculable. And to the unfunded liability, I'm sorry, I don't have a number on how much that would affect it.
Representative Johnson.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll share a couple of thoughts that I have on those same numbers. And indeed, the cost is below what it would have been originally with those changes. However, if you go through the payroll for that group, it's about $105 million. If you increase them from the 14+% in CAPERS to the 19+% in KP&F, it's a little over 5%, which is how they arrived at the $5.7 million estimate for the fiscal note annually. In addition to that, which you did take out, was the amortization over 15 years at another $10 million to provide the back benefit, which is not in this particular amendment. So that is my understanding of the fiscal note, and I'm sure the chair will give you an opportunity to correct my numbers if they are wrong. To the UAL is a challenge for whatever we do, and it's interesting. Right now, as you know, we are paying more than the annual cost in CAPERS as we make up that UAL. So there's somewhat of a wash on the UAL, but the unfunded liability of CAPERS will cause an increase in the contribution on the other employees because it is not spread over the larger number of employees upon whom the liability was created. So if my number of employees goes down, my UAL doesn't change, the rate actually goes up on that group. Conversely, to the representative's point, on KP&F, as I add more employees in, the rate for that group would actually come down as the unfunded liability is spread across that. So there are just a number of impacts that do happen financially and in the singles of millions of dollars. Those and other concerns are there. I agree with the representative in the premise in that the corrections subgroup in CAPERS has not fit this group well. And while we need to find a solution to that, and I look forward to working with him in the future to do that, I would oppose this amendment and ask that you do the same at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the representative dealing with this, but having lived CAPERS for 10 years, the situation, in 2019 and again in 2020, the Joint Committee of Pensions and Benefits did discuss the move to KP&F by corrections officers and determined that it did not fit. And actually going back, our researcher went back for a period of 40 years, and it had been discussed a total of 8 times, and each time a move was not suggested to be made. The indications from the study and what our joint committee determined was that corrections does not qualify for KP&F because they're not certified law enforcement officers. That's one of the qualifications that's outlined. Others, a number of reports looked at and said that stress and job situations should not be a cause to move to KP&F from CAPERS. And what the Joint Committee talked about and suggested in 2019, that when you're looking at retirement, and the concern was always expressed about the fear for safety and the working conditions and the wages, that when you look, if you're going to help the correction officers, the 2 most important things for current would be to look at the wage situation and improve the working conditions, and that what was described was there was oftentimes fear going to work and all, and when you look at a pension long-term, the fear would not be cured by the pension change, but the fear and concern could be cured by improving the working conditions, increasing the staff, and increasing the wages. So the Joint Committee each time recommended that the KP&F was not the route to go. The corrections officers and the corrections system were encouraged to come back and present a proposal to the Pensions Committee on a modification of the Corrections 1 and Corrections 2 makeup and make it more desirable with what they wanted and keep it within the framework of where they were able to enter, which was not KP&F. So I would encourage you to oppose this amendment, and I encourage the corrections staff and system to come back with a proposal to the Pensions Committee on a modification to Corrections 1 or 2 under the CAPER system and work in the way that they would be qualified to enter and that it would meet the requirements that they want, but meet them in the positive way and not make the move to KP&F, which it would upend that system because it would change the qualifications. So again, I encourage you to oppose this amendment.
The chair recognizes Representative Delperdang.
Would the carrier of the amendment stand for a few questions, please? Okay. I had run this a couple of years ago, similar bill. Yeah, it was a standalone bill. One of the things I heard from overwhelming from the corrections community is how this would change the vesting within CAPERS from 5 years to 15 years. And with the turnover that you mentioned earlier, it would possibly even eliminate a lot of people from it. Can you tell me, has anything changed since then?
I appreciate the question, Representative, and there's nothing that changes in this amendment, but I've had a different experience than you. When I've talked to corrections officers in my district, and a very large number of the folks that work at the Lansing Correctional Facility live in my district, I raised this issue with them because I was incredulous when they first, every single corrections officer talked to me about this. I say, wait a second, you're not going to be able to vest for an extra 10 years. But they really felt so strongly about the retirement age change that they were willing to accept that. And that's also, frankly, what makes the management in the Department of Corrections so favorable to this, because it does help them hang on to corrections officers.
Also, when the bill was run in 2019, I don't mean bill, but rather the year 2019, it ultimately failed. It was said that the COs are not firemen, the COs are not police. So with that thought in mind, have you looked at possibly any other subcategory options within the fire and police pensions?
I missed the last part of that question.
I'm sorry, to repeat the last part. Have you looked at possibly any other subcategories within fire and police, within the pension, the capers, rather than just throwing them in with the police?
You mean as in capers or in KP&F?
Speak to the mic, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So if this had come to a hearing, I think that we would have explored that, and I really hoped to get a hearing. And I hope that I hope that if we don't get this done today, we do get a hearing. But I think that is a possible course of action. But I'll tell you, one of the kind of compromise solutions that was raised to me is, well, these guys get Social Security, and a lot of police don't get Social Security. So maybe you should make a second-class citizen, KP&F member for corrections. But there are a ton of people in KP&F that also get Social Security, including our Capitol Police get Social Security and are in KP&F. So I personally do not favor carving out lesser benefits for them, but we may have worked that in committee if it had gotten there.
Thank you for your comments on that, and I appreciate that. Overall, I really do like what is trying to be done here. I did it myself a couple of years ago. But my concern now, we're dealing with H.R. 2405. To me, it looks like it's bonds within the Capers State School Group, and yet we're running an amendment concerning employee benefits for corrections officers. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to challenge the germaneness of the amendment.
The germaneness of the amendment has been challenged. Calling on the Rules Chair and Committee. The chair recognizes Rules Chair Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have done our analysis. As you know, the underlying bill has to do with the ability of the Kansas Development Finance Authority to borrow money and to apply those bonds against the unfunded liability of Capers. The amendment has to do with who is qualified to be a member of Capers. So we have the Capers connection. But we went through the bill, we tried to find a spot where it would talk about eligibility of membership in Capers, what classes of employees are eligible to be members, those types of things. We couldn't find that. We were unable to find any second point of contact or anything that would connect anything else that would connect the amendment to the bill. And because of that, our committee found that the amendment is not germane. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, thank you for indulging me to raise this amendment. I hope that next year we can come back and we can make this right, because the job that these guys do, protecting us and protecting those in their charge, and the job, they have to go into that building every day and their life's in danger, and they come home and they're living with amongst the families of the people that they're guarding inside, so they're in danger when they get home. So I would ask you to join me next year in making this right for our corrections officers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We are back on the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The major goal of this, or the peanut of the bill, is that we want to get Capers funding for the state school group up to about 80%. In doing this, if we make this move, we will increase it 4.8% up to 76.7%. The recommended level of funding is 80%, and we are approaching that. But without this, we're not going to get there for a while. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for the support in passing House Bill 2405. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, Representative Johnson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, body, for your consideration. As my colleague just stated, we're looking at the possibility of refinancing a portion of the debt to save on the interest cost. And with that, I would move, when the committee rises and reports, that it reports House Bill 2405 favorable as amended.
You have heard the motion by Representative Stephen Johnson to report House Bill 2405 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Next item, House Bill 2143. For the purposes of carrying House Bill 2143, the chair recognizes Representative Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
Continue.
HB 2143 from the Committee on Taxation would make the exemption permanent for certain cash rebates on sales or leases of new motor vehicles for sales tax purposes. Current law excludes cash rebates granted by manufacturers to purchasers or lessees of new motor vehicles if such rebates are paid directly to retailers. This provision is scheduled to sunset on June 30th, 2021. HB 2143 would repeal the sunset, making this exemption permanent. While there is a fiscal note attached to this bill, the fiscal note is a projection of additional revenue the state would receive if this exemption sunsets. I'm prepared to stand for questions.
Wishing to speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Gartner.
Standing ovation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague from Tax did a great job in explaining this bill. It's a good bill. We need to vote for this and move it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Stephen Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the Tax Committee's work on so many things. This is one that we had passed 3 years ago with a sunset, and at that time, what I recalled is the industry was going to give us some data on how total sales of vehicles might be affected by this possibility. We moved in with that sunset saying, let's look at it in 3 years. I haven't happened to look at it in detail to know where that is. I know we've got some issues along the border that I think are real concerns. I know that there are places where folks will look for that opportunity. Again, you'd have to have a residence at which you would register that vehicle to pay tax in a place other than Kansas. But I have hesitance to make this one permanent. And while I appreciate all of the work, if the carrier happens to have data that the industry brought, I'd be glad to listen to that. But I certainly don't wish to put anyone on the spot for those details. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Potter, you may close.
Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports HB 2143 favorably for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Potter to report House Bill 2143 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Up next, Senate Bill 21. For the purposes of carrying SB 21, the chair recognizes Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
Continue.
Senate Bill 21 passed unanimously out of the Senate. This bill will retroactively ratify the results of a November 2020 election in Cherokee County that will impose a 0.5% retail sales tax. And this will finance ambulance services, renovation and maintenance of county buildings and facilities, and other projects within the county. This tax will be required to terminate prior to January 1, 2033, and it will be effective upon publication in the Kansas Register. This tax is currently in effect, so essentially they're just extending it on. There were no amendments of committee. However, there will be a friendly amendment coming shortly. Proponents was a Kansas Association of Counties and multiple Cherokee County commissioners. There's no fiscal note. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Well, Representative, looks like a few people want to ask you some questions or comment on this bill. So to speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me today?
Speak into the mic, please.
Can you hear me now? All right. The carrier of the bill did a really good explanation. Might give you a little bit of more of the local flavor. I'll give you this. What we had going on in Cherokee County, we had a very large orthopedic hospital down there just outside of the town of Galena. And it was a huge operation, did a lot of business. And it was a pretty significant source of income from property tax for the county. That was a private business. They're soon to sell that to Mercy Hospital, which is a nonprofit So we're going to be looking at losing about $400,000 worth of property tax that our county just can't absorb. So what we had was, we had a half percent sales tax in effect that we used to pay for a new jail we built a while back. And the commissioners were looking for a way to make up and offset the funds that we were going to lose by the sale of this hospital. Well, they kind of got the cart before the horse. We didn't have the authority to do this. They put it on the ballot in November because it's going to expire here shortly. And so it passed by an overwhelming majority to extend the sunset of this tax. So that's why we're here today. I'm asking you for the authority to extend a tax. But I do have an amendment for this thing. Yes, it's already been there.
It appears long. So would you like to explain it?
You know, Mr. Chair, it just spread out like me. It just looks big, but it's really simple. You know, this came up yesterday. The tax chair brought this up to my attention that the tax reviser, he's the same guy that wrote Senate Bill 21. There's some wording differences in there, and it's not doing what the intent of the bill was to do, and that was to put the money into the general fund of the county. So in short, this fixes that problem according to the reviser, and that is the amendment.
Is there an objection to the waiving of the reading of the amendment? Seeing none. Representative Hauser, you can proceed.
Well, I've said about all I need to say on it. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask.
Anyone wishing to speak on the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Republicans, this was the amendment that we had discussed in calendar this morning. All it does is it's taking this tax and making sure that it does continue to go to the county. As this bill went through the Senate, that part was missed. As it went through the House committee, that part was missed. Reviser caught it late or earlier this week, and it's just a technical amendment to make sure the tax continues to be collected and appropriated the way it is. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Hauser, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, body, for the indulgence today. And with that, I'll move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hauser to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passes. To speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Auerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the carry the bill stand for a few questions? So, Representative, we were in committee together. We heard about the bill. It was a vote that was taken. I was in question, and so it's kind of we have to go back and approve it retroactively. Just a quick question for you and your district. Would you consider yourself a fiscal conservative?
I would.
So, Representative, could you explain how you're going to talk to people in your district about approving a retroactive sales tax increase?
That's a good question. After I thoroughly researched it and spent hours contemplating, I decided it'd be good policy.
So good policy. Can you explain what research would have brought you to that conclusion?
Well, you know, I believe there's actually some precedent out there. In 2019, this body happened to pass a similar bill for Finney County. And when I was going through the list of people who voted for it, I was just wondering, too, how you voted for that piece of legislation.
I voted for it. Representative, congratulations. You did a great job carrying the bill, and you do your research. Welcome to the state legislature.
Now to speak on the bill, the chair recognizes the belle of the ball, Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, the representative did a thorough job of explaining the retroactive Cherokee County bill, sales tax bill, but we need to do it, so I urge your support. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, Representative Bergkamp, you may close.
Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it report SB 21 favorably, SB 21 as amended favorably for a passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Bergkamp to report Senate Bill 21 favorably as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Up next is House Bill 2105. To carry the bill, we recognize Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In accordance with House Rule 1903, I move House Bill 2105, appearing under that order of business general orders, be passed over and retain a place on the calendar.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. We're now on to House Bill 2315. For the purposes of carrying HB 2315, the chair recognizes Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
Continue.
HB 2315 will provide a refundable tax credit for donors to Kansas technical colleges. Contributions can be made for capital improvements, deferred maintenance, technology, or equipment. For 100% refundable credit, it's limited to $500,000 per taxpayer, for $500,000 for any one technical college from that taxpayer, and an annual value of credits would not exceed $3.5 million. This also has a 5-year sunset, will end in 2026. Colleagues, let me just explain to you that our nation is in desperate need of craftsmen, nurses, plumbers, electricians, these people that go to tech colleges make our country move, and they do not have any taxing authority. This allows people to donate money to their colleges and not depend on property tax. So it should help with the 19 counties that have community colleges and has technical colleges not have to raise their property tax. This is an effective way to help these people. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Is there anyone wishing to speak to the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Gardner.
I promise. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the last bill. Hopefully, I'll be up here today. The representative, my colleague from Ellis, did a great job explaining this bill. It is very, very important. We heard from the technical colleges in tax committee, their return on investment is amazing. And these are good quality jobs that our constituents can fill. The problem is that it takes a lot of money to run a technical college and get the proper equipment for that curriculum, be it railroad diesel engines like Washburn Tech. They teach that in my district to auto repair. So this is a really good bill, and I ask your support. Thanks.
Anyone else wishing to speak on the bill? Seeing none, Representative Wassinger, you may close.
With that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, that it reports House Bill 2315 favorably for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Wassinger to report House Bill 2315 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Our last item of business today, House Bill 2116. For the purpose of carrying HB 2116, the chair recognizes Representative Mosier. No, Representative Kincannon. Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments to this bill.
You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 2116 would amend law governing child care by adding an exemption to the 20-hour per week work participation requirement for properly certified adult caretakers of a child in custody of the Secretary for Children and Families in out-of-home placement and needing child care assistance. Foster care families utilizing these resources while continuing to work at least 1 to 19 hours per week have made the commitment to be there for their foster children, sometimes setting aside what time might be spent on outside of the home work for one parent to be available for the kind of focused attention that many foster children need. Children in care often have need for multiple appointments for case management, court, behavioral health appointments, and visits with biological family. Then, too, let us not forget the needs of a foster parent's biological children. Allowing for child care assistance means the foster parent can meet the needs of all the children in the home. Current statute allows for the Child Care and Development Fund to be used to cover the cost of children in foster care when the foster parent works at least 20 hours per week. Providing a loving home and a stable environment for children in the foster care system, foster parents who continue in the workforce up to 19 hours per week are deserving of the child care assistance that House Bill 2116 will provide. There were two proponents of the bill, Department of Children and Families and Children's Alliance of Kansas. There were no opponents and no neutral testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with that I will stand for questions.
Is there anyone wishing to speak to the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the carrier of the bill did a good job. This is brought to us by DCF, and this is good policy. I urge your support for HB 2116. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Kincannon.
The carrier of the bill did a great job of covering this. I just wanted to add one little piece of news on this that I learned this morning. So when this was paid, these babysitting fees were paid through the foster care system. That was came out of SGF, and when it switched in 19 over to the Child Care Development Fund, which is a federal fund, it saved the SGF $1.5 million. So adding this, what this bill does is will save SGF another $165,000. Just wanted to add the numbers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the bill? Seeing none, Representative Mosier, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2116 favorable for passage.
You have heard the motion by Representative Mosier to report House Bill 2116 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. This is the conclusion of general orders. Chair recognizes Speaker Pro Tem Finch. Oh, sorry, it's right. Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we rise and report.
You've heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes.
Clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole recommends House Bills 2231, 2106, 2143, 2315, and 2116 be passed. House Bill 2239, 2405, Senate Bills 4713 and 21 be passed as amended. House Bill 2105 be passed over and retain a place on the calendar.
Speaker recognizes Representative Rogers to a motion to adopt the Committee of the Whole report.
I move the Committee of the Whole report.
You've heard the motion to adopt the committee report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. All right, we're going to stand at ease for a moment, get everyone back in the chamber.
Yes, ma'am. Have the adoption of the adjournment resolution in there? Oh, no. We'll want to do that.
Oh, let's do it.
Okay.
All right. I can take. We needed an adoption. A motion to adopt the, the Senate resolution.
Yeah, none of that will take any time at all.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Rule 2311, I move that an emergency be declared and that Senate Bill 47, Senate Bill 13, House Bill 2239, House Bill 2231, House Bill 2106, House Bill 2405, House Bill 2143, Senate Bill 21, House Bill 2315, and House Bill 2116 be advanced to that order of business, final action on bills and concurrent resolutions.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill number 47 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning income taxation, enacting the Kansas Taxpayer Protection Act relating to paid tax return preparers, requiring a signature, a tax identification number on returns and claims, authorizing actions by the Secretary of Revenue to enjoin certain conduct.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 47. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Shue votes aye. Representative Bishop votes aye. Representative Donahue votes aye. Representative Baker votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 115 having voted in favor and 8 against the passage of Senate Bill 47, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
Senate Bill number 13 by Senators Tyson, Alley, and others, an act concerning property taxation relating to tax levy rates, establishing notice and public hearing requirements prior to approval by a governing body to exceed its revenue neutral rate and discontinuing the city and county tax lid, prohibiting valuation increase of real property solely as the result of normal repair, replacement, and maintenance, establishing a payment plan for the payment of delinquent or non-delinquent taxes, requiring the Director of Accounts and Reports to include revenue neutral rate on regular budget form, eliminating certain requirements for budget approval for select taxing subdivision.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 13. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Tarwater votes aye. Representative Donahue votes aye. Representative Victors votes aye. Sorry, the printer was out of paper. Finch votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 120 having voted in favor and 3 against the passage of Senate Bill 13, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2239 by the Committee on Taxation, and Act concerning income taxation related to corporations, providing for an extension of the net operating loss carry-forward period.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2239. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. I think I'm going to vote on this one. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Ralph? Representative Ralph votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Didn't take it. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2239, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2231 by the Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, an act concerning crimes, punishment, criminal procedure relating to conducting a pyramid promotional scheme exemptions.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2231. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Delperdang votes no. Representative Neighbor votes aye. Representative Gartner votes aye. Representative Sanders votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 78 having voted in favor and 45 against the passage of House Bill 2231, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2106 by the Committee on Taxation, an act concerning income taxation relating to corporate tax returns, extending the dates when tax returns are required to be filed.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2106. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Delperdang votes aye. Representative Neighbor votes aye. Representative Victors votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2106, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2405 by the Committee on Appropriations, an act concerning retirement and pensions relating to Kansas Public Employee Retirement System, authorizing the issuance of revenue bonds to finance the unfunded actuarial pension liability of KPERS, providing requirements, limitations, procedures for the Kansas Development Finance Authority, Department of Administration, and the State Finance Council pertaining to such bonds.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2405. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Burris votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 117 having voted in favor and 6 against the passage of House Bill 2405, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2143 by the Committee on Taxation, an act concerning sales taxation relating to exemptions on certain cash rebates on sales or leases of new motor vehicles, making exemption permanent.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2143. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Ralph votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 119 having voted in favor and 4 against the passage of House Bill 2143, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
Senate Bill number 21 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning sales and compensating use tax relating to countywide retailer sales tax, approving election by Cherokee County.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 21. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Ralph votes aye. Representative Will Carpenter votes aye. Representative Wynn votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 119 having voted in favor and 4 against the passage of Senate Bill 21, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2315 by the Committee on Taxation, an act concerning taxation relating to income premiums and privilege tax, providing a credit for contributions to technical colleges.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2315. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Landwehr votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 119 having voted in favor and 4 against the passage of House Bill 2315, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action. Clerk will read.
House Bill number 2116 by the Committee on Children and Seniors, an act concerning children and minors relating to child care assistance eligibility and requirements, exempting certain adults from the 20-hour per week work requirement.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2116. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Jacobs votes aye. Representative Penn votes aye. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2116, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Reports of standing committees, the clerk will read.
Committee on Calendar and Printing recommends on requests for resolutions and certificates that requests by Representatives Victors, Coleman, Ruiz, Finch, Carlin, and Gartner be approved, and the Chief Clerk of the House be directed to order the printing of said certificates and the drafting of said resolutions.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adopt the Calendar and Printing Report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of the Calendar and Printing Report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion carries. Messages from the Senate, the clerk will read.
Announcing adoption of Senate Concurrent Resolution number 1610. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 1610 by Senators Masterson, Suellentrop, and Sykes, a concurrent resolution relating to the adjournment of the Senate and House Representatives for a period of time during the 2021 regular session of the Legislature. Be it resolved by the Senate of the State of Kansas, the House of Representatives concurring therein, that the Legislature shall adjourn at the close of business of the daily session convened on March 5, 2021, and shall reconvene on March 10, 2021, pursuant to adjournment of the daily session convened on March 5, 2021. Be it further resolved that the Chief Clerk of the House of Representatives and the Secretary of the Senate and employees specified by the Director of Legislative Administrative Services for such purpose shall attend to their duties each day during periods of adjournment, Sundays excepted, for the purpose of receiving messages from the Governor and conducting other such business as may be required. Be it further resolved that members of the Legislature shall not receive the per diem compensation and subsistence allowances provided by KSA 46137A and B and amendments thereto for any day within a period in which both houses of the Legislature are adjourned for more than 2 days, Sundays excepted. Be it further resolved that members of the Legislature attending a legislative meeting of whatever nature when authorized pursuant to law or by the Legislative Coordinating Council, the President of the Senate or the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the member of a conference committee attending a meeting of the conference committee authorized by the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives during any period of adjournment for which members are not authorized compensation and allowances, shall receive compensation, subsistence allowances, mileage, and other expenses in amounts prescribed under KSA 753212 and amendments thereto.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adopt the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of SCR 1610.
Body, you've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Are there announcements? Speaker recognizes Representative Rajas for an announcement.
House Republicans, we will be holding a caucus meeting next Wednesday, March 10th, 8 a.m. via WebEx, the topic K-12 education. Thank you.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, Speaker recognizes Majority Leader Hawkins for a motion to adjourn.
Republicans, no, just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House adjourn until Friday, March 5th at 8:30 a.m. pro forma.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it.